The sun rose on the 15th of September, 1861, without the heavy clouds and downpouring rain that were featured in the previous 2 days. 48 hours earlier, 2 companies of the Boonville Reserve Corps Regiment, otherwise known as the Home Guard, under the command of Major Joseph Eppstein, fended off an early morning attack by a combined force of Missouri State Guardsmen from Saline County and several northeast Missouri counties. No one could know for sure, but from all appearances, Major Eppstein's men held off a force that potentially numbered 4 times as many soldiers as their own. The earthworks were busy the morning of the 15th. A day prior, Colonel Jefferson Davis of the 22nd Indiana Infantry, acting Brigadier General at Jefferson City, responded to the rumors that the small garrison of Major Eppstein had fallen to the attacking secessionists. Fearing a general movement on Boonville, he dispatched the 5th Iowa Regiment under the command of Colonel William Worthington aboard the steamboat War Eagle. They arrived on the evening of the 14th, no doubt relieved to find the rumors unfounded. Arriving with the 5th Iowa aboard the War Eagle was an unnamed war correspondent from the New York Times. This individual, no doubt, set to work attempting to cobble together the story of the battle. He would have some significant success, as news of the victory of Eppstein's small detachment made headlines throughout the North and even onto other continents. But in reading his report in a letter dated on that September day and published in the New York Times on the 27th of September, the researcher is not drawn to his account of the battle itself, but an event he says occurred just before the outbreak of the action. Having given a description of the grounds and a thorough, if somewhat embellished introduction to Major Eppstein and his men, the correspondent then writes the following. It was a wet, rainy morning, and as the Home Guards were about preparing their breakfast and strolling over the campground, thoughtless of danger, a darky came running into the camp, saying that the enemy were just upon them. Scarcely had they time to rush inside the entrenchment when the rebels commenced firing upon them from 3 sides of the encampment. In an instant, the Union men, under the command of Major Eppstein, seized their pieces and returned the fire. The rebels, tearing down the enclosure in many places, took refuge behind buildings and trees, regardless of the commands of their officers. Colonel Brown of Saline County, the officer in command of the rebel forces, endeavored in vain to get them drawn up into a line of battle. The words of the correspondent regarding the alerting of Eppstein's men indicate that a sudden appearance of a runaway slave, most likely from the Saline County troops, open a unique chapter in this story. It is the first instance of the mention of such an event, and were it the only one, the author's embellishments might lend credence to it being just a small side note in an otherwise minor battle. But the correspondent is not what we would call a connected account. Although a contemporary of the event, he is giving us a secondary account of an event which he may have received from a member of the 5th Iowa, who in turn was relaying the story as he heard it, either from a member of the Home Guard or another member of the 5th Iowa. A local historian named James Toma wrote an article in the 1990s called The Negro Soldier and the Second Battle of Boonville, in which he sought to provide insight about this little-known incident. He also detailed it in his 2003 book, This Cruel, Unnatural War. The article can be found in PDF format on the Missouri Genealogy web, and the book can be purchased on Amazon. Toma's article on the subject cites a work published in 1989 by historian Michael Fellman. The work is entitled Inside War, the Guerrilla Conflict in Missouri During the American Civil War. It gives a strikingly detailed analysis of the war in Missouri, as well as several detailed interactions men of the 5th Iowa Regiment had with Boonville civilians. One of the footnotes mentions a letter written by Private Daniel R. Smith of Cedar County, Iowa. Private Smith wrote home to his parents that 5 Negroes brought the news of the intended attack and were inside the entrenchments during the engagement. Among them was a slave of Colonel Brown's. Whilst fighting, he took hold of a gun and shot his master, who fell and soon after expired. The darky is tickled almost to death. This account is one that sparked the writing of Mr. Toma's narrative, and was potential evidence for a truly startling thesis. If, as Daniel Smith wrote, an escaped slave had indeed taken up a musket and fired it at the attacking secessionists, perhaps even killing their leader, his former master, as the document states, this might have startling ramifications for the engagement at Boonville. If true, it might be, as James Toma stated, the first incident where a black man fought in armed defense of the Union during the American Civil War. But how connected is Private Smith to the event? He, like the correspondent, is connected to the affair in a secondary manner. One key difference, however, is that Private Smith at least seems to have made visual contact with the particular individual mentioned. The runaway appeared in the entrenchments, perhaps even sitting around a fire. Being tickled to death, there seems an indication that he perhaps verbally was recounting the events of 13 September. The detail of Smith's statement leaves the researcher wanting more. But before one gets too far in advance of the evidence, one more item must be mentioned. While the newspaper correspondent mentioned the sudden appearance of one runaway slave, Private Smith mentions 5. The 5th Iowa Infantry Regiment was no stranger to Boonville. They themselves, on orders from Brigadier General Ulysses S. Grant on the 26th of August, participated in an event that may have served as a spark for the events that led to the Second Battle of Boonville. While back in Boonville for this second excursion, there were numerous scouting expeditions that ranged as far as 15 to 20 miles distance from the fairgrounds. Another member of the 5th Iowa Regiment, Corporal Cyrus J. Reed, wrote of an incident on the 18th of September, one day after Private Daniel Smith wrote his parents. He described companies E and H of the 5th Iowa having returned from a scouting expedition with property valued at nearly $5,000 and with a gang of 6 Negroes in tow. The corporal does not relate the nature of the events concerning the detention of the contraband slaves. His story focused far more on the interaction between the members of the 5th Iowa and the Sesh sympathizers they encountered. The primary point here is that within 5 days of the battle, not one former slave, but rather several of them were present on the fairgrounds, and many of them may not have had anything to do with the Missouri State Guardsmen who attacked Epstein's home guards on the 13th. Private Smith's letter and the events recounted by Corporal Reed are close enough together that the two stories may bleed into one. However, there is little doubt of the presence of contraband and runaway slaves amongst the soldiers in the days following the battle, so more investigation is necessary to see just what, if any, role these individuals held in the Second Battle of Boonville. In both accounts, it is critical to note that these slaves were informants. While the correspondent of the New York Times may be off in his timeline, we can draw a reasonable conclusion that the appearance of one or more fugitive slaves may have moved Major Joseph Eppstein to action, resulting in the arrest of those prominent Boonville citizens on the 11th of September.